The afternoon sun spilled over the rolling hills of Virginia, glinting off champagne glasses and the polished marble steps of the Carlisle estate. Every corner of the property screamed perfection. Ivory roses climbing trellises, a 12-piece orchestra tuning their violins, guests in silk and sequins mingling beneath crystal chandeliers. It was the kind of wedding where even the air carried the scent of money. Grace Whittaker stood at the edge of it all, clutching her clutch bag like a lifeline. Her navy blue dress was simple but elegant, paired with her grandmother's pearls. Nothing to attract attention, nothing to give away the secret she had spent 15 years guarding. She had learned long ago that true power was often mistaken for modesty. Across the lawn, her son, Logan Whittaker, laughed under a canopy of lights. 32, confident, still with that earnestness that made people trust him too easily. His new wife, Ava Carlisle, floated beside him like she had been born for the spotlight, her white gown shimmering like a mirror to her ambition. When Ava's green eyes finally landed on Grace, her lips curved into a smile that was both sweet and cutting. "Mrs. Whittaker," she called brightly, the kind of brightness that drew eyes without warmth. "You found us. There's a table right over there by the service door. More private." Several guests chuckled politely, not realizing, or not caring, that it was an insult dressed as hospitality. Grace's throat tightened, but she only smiled. "Thank you, dear. Privacy suits me just fine." The music swelled. The laughter continued. But somewhere between the polished speeches and the clinking of crystal, something shifted. Ava, arm in arm with her parents, glided across the ballroom toward Grace. "Mom, Dad," Ava said, the practiced sweetness in her tone so sharp it could cut glass. "I'd like you to meet Logan's mother." Richard Carlisle, tall, silver-haired, paused as he looked at Grace. His expression changed. First curiosity, then something close to shock. The room seemed to hush, though the orchestra hadn't stopped playing. "Grace Whittaker," he said slowly, disbelief coloring his voice. "You're the woman from the acquisition board 3 years ago, the one who bought Carlisle Holdings." Ava's painted smile faltered. "What?" she breathed. Grace's heart skipped. The carefully built walls around her private life trembled. For a split second, she saw flashes of that boardroom, the men in suits, the signatures, the silent woman in the corner who let her lawyer speak for her. That woman had been her. "I think you're mistaken," Grace said softly, forcing a polite laugh. "I'm just a retired engineer." But Richard's eyes narrowed with certainty. "No, I remember you. You barely said a word, but everyone in that room listened when you did." Silence draped over the table. Marianne Carlisle fidgeted with her diamond bracelet, and Ava stood frozen, confusion and disbelief battling behind her eyes. Grace felt the old instinct rise, the need to disappear, to melt back into the background and let the moment pass. But the word embarrassment echoed in her mind. Ava had used it earlier, whispering to a friend as Grace entered the reception. "She's sweet, but a bit of a family embarrassment, isn't she?" She drew a steady breath. "Mr. Carlisle," she said, voice level but unyielding, "that must have been quite the meeting. I'm sure the woman you met handled herself well." "I'll say," Richard murmured, half to himself. Ava glanced between them, her confusion hardening into discomfort. For the first time all day, she didn't look in control. Later that night, when the chandeliers dimmed and the laughter thinned, Grace stood alone on the balcony, overlooking the estate gardens. The scent of champagne and cut roses hung heavy in the air. Somewhere inside, Ava was still smiling for photographs, unaware that her life had just brushed against something far larger than she imagined. 15 years of invisibility had protected Grace. 15 years since her late husband, Thomas, had invented the technology that changed everything. 15 years since she turned a modest patent sale into an empire hidden in plain sight. Now, one careless moment, one name spoken aloud, had cracked her perfect disguise. Grace's reflection stared back from the glass door, calm, composed, unthreatening. Exactly what everyone expected to see. But behind that reflection burned something new. "They think I'm invisible," she whispered into the cool Virginia night. Maybe it's time they saw who they were looking at. And inside, the orchestra began its final song, a waltz that sounded almost like a warning. The following afternoon, the sky over Richmond was pale blue, too calm for what Grace Whittaker knew was coming. She arrived at Le Jardin, one of those rooftop restaurants where the view cost more than the food. The hostess led her to a corner table already occupied by Ava Carlyle Whittaker, glowing in a tailored ivory suit and diamond earrings that sparkled with studied precision. "Grace," Ava said, standing to greet her with a kiss on the cheek. Her perfume was expensive, confident. "Thank you for meeting me. I ordered us a Bordeaux to celebrate the family." Grace's eyes flicked to the label, Chateau Lafite Rothschild, 2009. Nearly $1,000 a bottle. She smiled politely. "Celebration seems a bit early, doesn't it?" Ava's smile didn't waver. It's never too early to set a tone. Logan arrived moments later, looking uneasy, his tie slightly crooked. He kissed his mother's forehead before sitting beside his wife. Grace could sense his tension. He'd always been the bridge between her quiet pragmatism and Ava's relentless ambition. "So," Ava began, swirling her wine, "last night was surprising. My father hasn't stopped talking about it." Grace stayed still. "I can imagine." Ava leaned forward, eyes gleaming with practiced curiosity. "He said the name Grace Whittaker shook the boardroom once. The woman who purchased Carlyle Holdings. Silently, strategically. It's funny, isn't it? You even wore a similar navy dress back then." Logan froze. "Ava," he warned. But she ignored him and slid her phone across the table. On the screen was an article, "Mystery Investor Acquires Carlyle Holdings in $700 million Deal." A blurry photograph showed a woman half hidden among lawyers. The resemblance was unmistakable. Grace's heart thudded, but she held her expression. "Coincidences happen," she said lightly. "Of course," Ava replied. "But coincidences that involve $700 million are rare." Logan turned to his mother. "Mom, please tell me she's wrong." Grace inhaled slowly, meeting his eyes, the same brown shade as his father's. "Your dad and I made a few good investments," she said quietly. "That's all." "A few good investments?" Ava's laugh was like glass breaking. "That's one way to describe owning the company my father built." Grace's fingers tightened around her wine glass, but her tone remained calm. "Your father built debt, not legacy. I saved the jobs of hundreds who depended on that company." For the first time, Ava's confident MBA mask slipped. Then, like a switch, she smiled again, smoother, sharper. "You know, Grace, I actually studied this sort of thing. Family wealth management. When a family reaches a certain level of success, it's crucial to establish a structure that protects everyone's interests." Grace tilted her head. "Meaning?" "I'm talking about creating a family foundation," Ava said sweetly. $50 million to start, something that shows credibility in philanthropic circles. 3 trustees, you, Logan, and me. Equal votes naturally. It's the most logical structure." Logan looked blindsided. "Ava, we should—" "No, she's right," Grace interrupted softly. "It's logical. But tell me, dear, whose idea was the equal votes?" "Mine, of course." "Of course." Grace reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder. "Then maybe you'll enjoy some data since you love structure." She slid the folder across the table. "The Carlyle family's current financial position." Ava's confident smile faltered. The color drained from her face as she read, "Estate mortgaged at 80%, depleted investment accounts, income sustained by consulting fees arranged through the new management of Carlyle Holdings. Grace's management." Logan's voice cracked. "Mom, you had someone investigate them?" Grace met his gaze, pained. When people start questioning my life, I like to know who's asking. Ava closed the folder slowly, eyes burning. This is an invasion. No, sweetheart, Grace said softly. This is clarity. The silence was suffocating. Logan leaned back, rubbing his temples. You've both turned this into a business negotiation. It already was, Ava snapped, then caught herself, her MBA smile snapping back into place. Grace rose, dropping her napkin on the table. You wanted transparency, Ava. Now you have it. Just remember, knowledge is a dangerous currency. As she walked away, the hum of polite conversation filled the restaurant again. Behind her, Logan whispered, Mom, what are you not telling me? Grace didn't answer. She only looked out at the skyline, calm, composed, invisible no more. Rain lashed against the tall windows of Morgan & Cohen Financial, streaking the glass with silver veins. The city below looked blurred, distorted, just like the line between family and war. Inside the boardroom, the air was so tight you could almost hear it breathe. At one end of the table sat Grace Whitaker, poised in a charcoal gray suit, her expression unreadable. Beside her was Caleb Morgan, her longtime financial advisor, calm as a chess player setting up the final move. Across from them, Ava Carlyle Whitaker sat flanked by her parents, Richard and Marianne, and a lawyer with a predator's smile, Marla Kent. Let's be clear, Marla began, sliding a folder across the table. My client believes Mrs. Whitaker has deliberately concealed significant assets, depriving her son's family of their fair financial security. These actions suggest a pattern of deception. Caleb adjusted his glasses. Pattern of deception? Mrs. Whitaker's finances are perfectly legal. Your client's recent concerns appear motivated by personal disappointment, not legal grounds. Ava's voice sliced in, smooth and trained. This isn't about disappointment. It's about responsibility. Grace, you've manipulated everyone. You let my father think he'd failed as a businessman while you profited from it. Grace's tone didn't waver. Your father did fail, Ava. I simply cleaned up his mess. Richard's shoulders stiffened, shame flashing in his eyes. Marianne reached for his hand but didn't speak. The truth didn't need volume. It carried its own thunder. Ava leaned forward. You think you can buy respect by hiding behind shell companies? That's not strength, it's cowardice. Grace met her gaze, unblinking. No, dear, it's strategy. The difference is that strategy wins. Marla tapped her pen, breaking the silence. Mrs. Whitaker, my client has already contacted the SEC regarding potential irregularities in your acquisitions. They're quite interested in your shell structures. Caleb's jaw tightened, but Grace raised a hand. Of course they are. You've made me very popular lately. For a moment, thunder cracked so loud it made the glass tremble. Then Grace spoke again, her voice low but carrying the weight of finality. I'll make this simple. You have 72 hours to withdraw every complaint, every investigation, every whisper you've started. In return, I'll give you a settlement large enough to preserve your lifestyle and your pride. Ava blinked. What kind of settlement? $5 million, Grace said evenly. One-time payment. In exchange, you'll sign a non-contact agreement. You and your parents will never reach out to me or to Logan again. The room went silent. Even the rain seemed to pause. Logan, who had sat quietly until now, shot to his feet. Mom, are you serious? You're offering money for my marriage to end? Grace turned to him gently. No, sweetheart. I'm buying you peace. Across the table, Marla's calculating eyes darted between them. She could see the numbers. $5 million was far more than her client could win in any court. But pride is the most expensive currency. Ava's jaw trembled. You can't just erase me. Grace stood, her reflection mirrored against the glass wall. You erased yourself the moment you turned marriage into an acquisition. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Ava whispered, I need time. You have until noon in 3 days, Grace replied. After that, I will withdraw every contract your family relies on. The estate, the consulting positions, gone. I suggest you decide what's worth more, your pride or your future. The meeting ended in stunned silence. Grace walked out first, heels echoing against the marble floor. Behind her, Logan's voice cracked like glass. When did you become this ruthless? Grace paused at the door, her back still turned. I've always been this woman, Logan. I just never had to show her. 3 mornings later, at 11:47 a.m., Caleb's phone rang. He listened quietly, then hung up and turned to Grace. They've accepted. Grace exhaled, a sound between relief and heartbreak. The deal was done. Ava would take the money and vanish. Outside, the rain had stopped. The glass walls glimmered with sunlight, breaking through clouds. Cold, brilliant, and final. 6 months later, the Virginia air that once smelled of rain and tension was a distant memory. Grace Whitaker stepped out of a small moving truck under the burning New Mexico sun, her white linen shirt fluttering in the desert breeze. The adobe house she'd just bought in Santa Fe stood quietly at the end of a narrow street lined with bougainvillea and red clay walls. No gates, no marble floors, just open sky and silence. Inside, the rooms were simple: wooden beams, woven rugs, a faint scent of sage. As she unpacked the last box, Grace looked up at the slow-turning brown ceiling fan. Its rhythm was soft, steady, nothing like the cold hum of the glass boardroom she had left behind. Perfect, she whispered. No one to impress, no one to fear. Each morning began the same way. A cup of dark coffee, a walk to the farmer's market, a few words exchanged with the vendor who sold handmade pottery. Nobody here knew her name beyond Mrs. Grace, the quiet lady with the blue scarf. And for the first time in decades, that was exactly who she wanted to be. But the peace came with ghosts. Some nights, she'd wake to the echo of Logan's voice from that boardroom. When did you become so ruthless? The question lingered like a stain she couldn't wash off. She had saved him, yes, but the cost had been steep. Then one Sunday afternoon, her phone rang. Logan's name flashed on the screen. Her heart clenched. "Mom," he said softly, "I wanted you to know. The divorce is final. And I met someone." Grace closed her eyes, bracing herself. "Oh?" "Her name's Sienna Brooks. She teaches elementary school. When I told her you live in a small apartment and drive the same old sedan, she said it sounded like you had your priorities straight." For the first time in a long while, Grace laughed. A real, unguarded laugh. "She sounds wonderful, sweetheart." "She is. She doesn't care about money. Just about people." "Well," Grace said, smiling through tears, "then she's already richer than most." When Logan and Sienna visited a month later, they brought fresh-baked cookies instead of expensive wine. Sienna hugged Grace like she'd known her all her life. "I've heard so much about you," she said warmly. "I was hoping you'd teach me how to make those enchiladas Logan keeps talking about." Grace chuckled. "Only if you promise not to ask for my bank statements afterward." Sienna blinked, then laughed until her eyes watered. "Deal." That night, as they sat under paper lanterns on Grace's small patio, the laughter sounded different, unforced, real. No crystal glasses, no masked politeness, no stage-managed smiles, just the sound of healing. After they left, Grace walked through the quiet house, the moonlight painting soft silver across the walls. On her desk sat the file labeled Thomas Fund. She opened it. Dozens of letters from young engineering students, thank you notes, sketches, photos. Her favorite was from a boy named Luis in Pittsburgh. "Mrs. Whitaker, if not for your scholarship, I'd still be loading trucks at the warehouse. Now I'm designing renewable energy systems." Grace pressed the paper to her chest. Thomas would have been proud. She didn't need stock reports or Forbes rankings. This ripple of opportunity, was her true legacy. She poured herself a cup of chamomile tea, sat beneath the ceiling fan, and listened to its steady hum. The night was cool, scented with pine and distant rain. Ava's shadow sometimes drifted through her thoughts. $5 million bought her silence, but not redemption. Grace wondered where she was. New York? Miami? Maybe plotting her next investment. But then she'd shake the thought away. That chapter had already burned itself out. In Santa Fe, Grace had traded power for peace, secrecy for sincerity. She had finally learned that wealth meant nothing without quiet mornings, real laughter, and a heart unburdened by pretense. She stood, touched the framed photo of Thomas on the mantel, and whispered, "Invisibility was my armor. Dignity is my home." Outside, the desert wind rose, brushing against the walls like a prayer. The brown ceiling fan spun slowly above her, pushing the warm air in calm circles, steady, silent, endless, like the rhythm of a life finally set free.